Hello and welcome back for those that have done other lessons in this course. If you're showing up for the first one, this is your entree in. Welcome. My name is Kristen. I'm part of the ADVizE project team. ADVizE stands for a data visualization experience for pre-service teachers. And so far, the different modules, we've been exploring the hands-on activities we have developed and refined and adapted over the last couple of years, working with pre-service teachers across the country to help build their data skills and get their exploratory data analysis, sort of build out a stronger foundation around it, as well as like starting to, if you did the nonsense data activity, starting to get at that, how do we think about how we teach data skills and how we sequence them and what makes a strong data activity and what even are the data skills that we should be having our students work on and practice as they go forward? So let's dive more into that and how we can support pre-service teachers thinking and understanding kind of what is the landscape and what they should be getting prepared to teach their future students. So I want to ground in the fact that what we are doing in our K-12 system, so what our pre-service teachers are preparing for to be a part of, is not to make professional data scientists, data analysts, any of those things. What we are doing in our K-12 system, right, is we are preparing our students for that next step after high school, after they graduate. And we can kind of take an analogy from soccer, something that often happens in many towns around the United States, as what do I mean by that? Well, when my students, and by my students, I mean my children, that is literally what I was trying to say. When my kids were little, they were really excited to play soccer, and their town called this soccer. And I called it amoeba ball because you could tell exactly where the soccer ball was on the field because all of the children were around the ball no matter where it was on the field. This looks dramatically different than when our teams go to the World Cup or to the Olympics and they represent the United States playing soccer. Same sport, but it looks dramatically different in terms of how it is played and the technique and the skill and the nuance and all of those things. So this is what I mean. My town is not trying to create an Olympic bound soccer player in kindergarten, or they do not hold those kindergartners to the same expectations as one would hold our Olympic team. And we're not even trying to go for those Olympics. We're just going for what is that next step after high school. And we can continue this analogy forward. Each step along the way in my town, my kids have been able to play soccer at an increasing level of game and expectation. Sometimes the skills have changed, like we added heading in 2 years ago for my oldest, right? So the actual skills and the components both build in complexity and deepen in nuance in terms of the strategy, and we add some new ones in along the way as we go. We can do exactly the same thing when it comes to thinking about teaching our students, our K-12 students, data literacy. And we have a resource that is really helpful for our pre-service teachers when they are launching into this to think about what does that even actually look like? Like what are the data skills my third graders need to start to be working on as they're mastering. So a colleague, Molly Schaffler, and I, a couple years ago, built out a scope and sequence of data skills based on what shows up in our math, science, and social studies standards, aka what we're asking our students to be able to do with regards to working with and making sense of math in those core subject areas. What does it actually look like K-12 to build out those skills, but at a level that is this is what I actually need to be doing in my lessons or in my activities or in my, threading through in my units, so that I, as a teacher, a classroom teacher, have a bit of a better sense, like, how do I turn that standard into a reality? How do I know how my students are doing as they're building those skills? So it goes K-12, and for each set of skills, so each task, there is a row. Why do we call it a task? Well, here's the deal. Like that specific skill that we are working on, the nuance of what it actually looks like varies as we get older. The same way what dribbling looks like for a kindergartner looks different than a fourth grader, looks different than an 11th grader, right? But the task is dribbling and soccer. The task might be, is similar in data. There'd be a task, and then within each cell for the different grade bands, there would be the specific skill of what that looks like in those grade levels in that grade band. So we built this out so that you can look by different tasks. So you can look within a column by the grade band or grade level you work with, and you could look across the vertical progression as our students move from kindergarten through 12th grade. And yes, it always feels so funny to be like, you can look horizontally to sense the vertical progression for our students. But it was just the way that it worked out to orient the table. These are grouped by grade bands, and then 6th and 9th grade are pulled out on their own. I'll explain that in a moment. So when you're looking at your grade band, what you can get a sense of is, these are the skills that our students should be practicing and working on in the early grades of that grade band, and what they should have mastered by the end of that grade band. So it isn't every single year, what exactly does it look like by grade level? Because there's nuance and difference among our students and within our curriculums and where this fits in. And just as a reminder, these are our skills for math, science, and social studies. So it's not on any one of us in any one subject to teach all of these skills, but rather across our subject areas to provide that holistic setup for our K-12 students as they go through our system. But this is a resource to get a sense of, okay, well, but what is my lane? What is my work that I can do with my students? So if I am a 3rd grade teacher, I can jump in and I can get a sense of, okay, so what are the skills that my students should start to be practicing? And what are the skills they should have mastered or should be far more confident and competent at from their K-2 experience? And if we're in 3rd grade, we don't even need to worry about where we need to stop, because our 4th and 5th grade colleagues are going to pick up the reins and take it forward as our students progress through. If we're a 5th grade teacher, right, we can focus on, okay, what is my, sort of my lane of like, I really want to make sure my students are really confident and comfortable with all of these skills by the end of the year. And what's my stop? What do I not need to worry about? Because my colleague in 6th grade is going to pick up the reins and carry it forward and teach those other skills as we go forward. A couple things about orientation into the table is that some of our skills, we learn all the individual skills before the end of high school. We are certainly still using and applying those learned skills at the end of high school, but there isn't a new skill to learn in the task. Some of our skills, it is just not developmentally appropriate for our youngest of youngest students to be working on that task. Just developmentally, brain-wise, there's not a space for them yet. And so you'll see in the K-2, there are some where it's just like, this isn't applicable, this task yet, which is great. Move on to some of the other skills. We've organized the table so that every other row alternates in color just to make it easier to sort of take it in and see where there are different tasks showing up. And when we work with data, you might have been seeing this as we've been going through, there's sort of 3 general buckets or 3 realms, we call them, of when we're working with data. We need to get data, we need to actually have data to work with, we explore those data, and we infer meaning from those data. So within the table, all of the tasks that relate to getting, finding, accessing, like early preparations of our data are going to be in yellow and white alternating. All of our tasks that relate to exploring, visualizing, filtering, starting to get at describe and analyzing patterns will be alternating blue and white. and all of the tasks that are relevant to inferring meaning from data. So interpreting the data in context, articulating uncertainty, building, using that knowledge to move forward, right? There's a purpose of what we're doing with the data. We'll be alternating of green and white. Okay, one more thing that I want to share before I keep going forward. You will notice in this example that I've put up here that we have some red cells that are showing up in a row of yellow or in a row of white. Those red cells indicate our keystone skills. So not upper anchor, but a keystone, as in kind of like a roof. Like if you don't have that, it all falls apart and it doesn't work. So what we mean by that is our students need to have fully integrated and mastered that skill, that keystone skill, in order to be able to build upon it and independently apply that task, be successful in that task going forward. Sometimes, yes, they show up in our kindergarten through second grade. Sometimes they show up in middle school. Never do they show up in upper high school. So these are really like critical key components that our students need to conceptually grasp and master and build forward on. Okay, enough of me talking and orienting. Let's move forward. Okay, so because it is hard to explain a whole task in a sentence or two, in like 5 words, we have built out a table that is the essential ideas. Like, what actually is that idea for that row, for that task? So if you're a little confused on like, what do we actually mean by formulate a question in a given context, jump over to the essential ideas tab to get a better idea. We also got asked a lot of like, well, but just what are the keystone skills? And so we also have a tab for the keystones map where we just pull out for every single task, what is the keystone skill? And we've listed what the grade band or grade level is that skill shows up. So this is important because if your students are struggling to independently apply the task or the skills that you've been teaching them and it just doesn't feel like it's sticking, this is a great time to use that ability to see the whole K-12 progression, to take a step back and see, is there a step that they were missing? Is it a keystone skill ahead that maybe they didn't fully master? And that is what the problem is, because we can handhold our students through subsequent skills, but it's really hard for them independently to apply and work with it. Okay, so this table we call the building blocks for data literacy. You can access it here at dataspire.tiny.us/building blocks. And I want to sort of give a little bit of an overview of what it's going to look like. So when you jump in, you will see the table. It is a big, big table, right? As I was talking about, you want to make sure you're on this building blocks table tab to actually see the table. There's the essential ideas tab, the keystone tab, right? As I was just talking about, but really lean into like this building blocks tab is where you want to be. And this is how we break it down for pre-service teachers, how we found over the different implementations that this is a good stair step into this really large table that's going to be this incredible reference resource going forward, but can be a wee bit overwhelming the first time we jump in and look at it. Okay, I'm not going to lie. Maybe the first couple times we jump in and look at it. So I'm just going to talk through what we suggest doing with your pre-service teachers, or what we have found to be really helpful in our different implementations across the country. So first thing we do is we put them into small groups. We have them access the table, pull it up, and then we have them select a grade band column. I encourage you to walk along and do the same thing if you would like. So pick a column, any column, whatever column you're interested in, and just review that column. Just narrow in on one column and read down the column of a grade band. And consider what kind of skills are included in that column for students to learn. And start capturing ideas, notes, thoughts in the asset information for this lesson. There is a document that you can fill out. It steps you through each of these steps if you want to follow along in that document, and or if you want to have an idea of like, what's a good thing to a worksheet to hand to your pre-service teachers as they are doing this as well. So we want to capture things like clarifying questions, things we don't understand about what's showing up in that column, or ideas for what that could look like in terms of something that they've seen or thought, or that you all have already talked about in your course about what that particular skill would look like for students in those grade levels. So we spend about 10 minutes doing some initial exploration, orientation into the building blocks for data literacy framework table. Then we bring everyone back together and we do a check-in. We ask sort of, how's it going? What questions are coming up about the table, about specific data skills, just to sort of crowdsource that, like, this is a big thing. This is a big thing to wrap your head around in its entirety. And even it's a hard thing to wrap your head around, like a whole column. It's a really different way of potentially thinking about data and data skills to bring forward into your classroom. So we want to get some of these questions answered or addressed, or at least voiced, before we step into the second part of the activity, which is going back into the small breakouts where we do some application brainstorming, where, staying within that column that the students have picked and selected and reviewed previously or were orienting to previously, ask them to pick 2 to 3 data skills, aka 2 to 3 rows in their column, and then have them brainstorm how they could focus a lesson around helping students practice and build those skills. So not the entire column, 2 to 3, ideally even 1 to 2, but that's often hard to do, of what the students would be practicing. Now, we ask them to capture thoughts, to list the data skills they selected, because this is going to be important in a second. When we've done this across the country, a lot of our classrooms have done this out on flip chart paper, or if they've done it on a digital slide, different things, but we need this to be in a way that they can present to one another. So we want to capture ideas. These are just rough brainstorms. This is draft. This does not need to be a full written out lesson plan. At least that's the way that we have done it in this activity at this stage, right? Because we're just sort of norm setting. How do we use and leverage this resource? Not how do we use it to perfect it in something that we are doing. We're doing our initial practice. Now, it often comes up, why 2 or 3? Well, we can only actually work on and retain and process a handful of things at a time. And what we find often with our own pre-service teachers, as well as those that have gone through the project in the last couple of years, as well as all of the in-service teachers we work with across the country, is that there is this like strong tendency when it comes to data to try to put everything in the kitchen sink into one lesson. And the problem with that is that that's really hard for our novices as they are building those skills. So for kids who already have mastered some of those skills, they're great and they can like knock them all out. For our students that are still practicing those skills, it's cognitive overload. And most importantly, for us as a teacher, we don't know where they're hitting that overload. We don't know where they're struggling with the skills if we pack too many skills into one activity for the students to be primarily practicing. Now, why do I put that emphasis in? Because there likely might be other skills that are showing up in the lesson, but they would be something that you would either do for the students, you would facilitate a full group discussion about it type of thing. This is what we share with the pre-service teachers. So there can be surrounds, but that's on the teacher to take on. We want to make sure it's just 1 to 2 to 3 practices that we're actively asking the students to practice and work on in any one learning experience. So in the small groups, we ask that the pre-service teachers do this initial brainstorming. I encourage you to do it. If you haven't been stopping along the way, I do encourage you to sort of pause and go through this process so that you have a real good sense of what's in this table and how we have found asking pre-service teachers to sort of orient into it can be really helpful. And as I noted, we have the pre-service teachers share out with one another what their initial brainstorms are. And again, because these are not fully fleshed out lesson plans, because we're not like asking for any of like, or all of the specifics about what this is actually like. This is like brainstorming ideas. We want to be mindful that when we're leaving comments for one another, they're things that are positive or excitement or connections or what resonates, right? We don't want to throw anybody under the bus for their brainstorming, largely because we don't know all of the components of the conversation that went into what is on the flip chart or what is on the slide. But what we have found is doing this public viewing or sort of this way to kind of crowdsource the brainstorming helps normalize that brainstorming looks a lot of different ways. Draft brainstorms can be super draft, and that's okay. That's where we expect them to be, and can be incredible light bulb moments for, oh, I hadn't thought about it, or oh, that's so interesting, I could think about it this way, to then go back and really deepen the work that the students do on one, how to leverage the building blocks framework, and two, how to think about integrating data into their lessons. We've seen this given how many, or we've seen this in fun ways, given that a good number of the faculty that implemented over the last couple of years had students who were actively doing their student teaching or their practicum in the same semester, in the same class, in their methods class, as they were going through these activities. And it was really fun to see these connection points and those ahas turn into reality and be directly applied. So this is the building blocks framework. It is a reference resource going forward, but this is the hands-on activity that we have found over the years is a great way to sort of scaffold or structure pre-service students, pre-service teachers into using it, seeing it as a resource, understanding how to leverage it as a resource. So some takeaways. There are a range of data skills that students need to learn about during their K-12 experience. But sort of thinking of like, this is the whole thing can be overwhelming. So instead approaching it in a scaffolded manner, then like we do in soccer, then we can build and deepen those skills over time so that our students are doing the same thing every year, that it's too advanced for them when they're younger and too elementary for them when they're older, but that we can really progress and keep pushing our students on that learning edge as they're going through. While we can and should expose students to almost every aspect or task of working with data each year they're going through school, what that looks like, what the actual skill is, what we can expect from our students changes over time as they master previous skills and as we build on them with new skills. And what the building blocks for data literacy does is it helps provide that roadmap of how does that, what's the expectation, the task, but then what does that skill actually look like at the different years as they're going through? And then the building blocks for data literacy, it's a resource, a reference resource to use going forward to help with thinking of, okay, where am I at? Where my students be at? They're struggling with this thing. How do I go backwards a skill on the map and see, okay, have they mastered that? Maybe that's the reason why they're struggling with this piece, different things. And on that note, I should say, we have grade banded this, but our students need all of these skills. Our K-12 students need all of these skills. So as you are working with your pre-service teachers, if they are struggling with some of these data skills, take a look at the map and see, kind of try to identify like where they might be struggling. And it might be that as they were going through their K-12 experience, they didn't get some of those keystone skills or some of those different skills across the entire map. Not their fault. They might just not have gotten it. So even though they're undergraduates, we still need to give them those opportunities to build those skills. And similarly, normalizing that for them, what they might see in their future students. If they have sixth graders that are really struggling with their sixth grade skills, it is more beneficial for those students and easier for those pre-service teachers when they get into the classroom, our teachers, to go back to the third through fifth grade skills and work on those, then bang their head against the wall of, but they're in sixth grade and these are the sixth grade skills, because these skills build on each other over time. So if you're missing one of those initial building blocks, it's hard to keep building up. That's why we called it the building blocks. Hopefully this was helpful as an unpacking of what this resource is, how you can leverage it as a resource for yourself working with your pre-service teachers, as well as support them in understanding this is a reference guide that they can use going forward and how to use it. Until the next lesson, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in our last lesson.